Hey, Michelle.
Hello. Hi, Mel. Good to be with you.
Wonderful to see you. And gosh, it's been a while since we did a live, so fun
It
times.
has. It is. Yeah, it has been a while, but it's good to be back. And so I know we've had heaps of people RSVP to the LinkedIn Live and all of the other channels. So thank you for coming online, whoever's online, and of course watching on Catch Up, or of course listening to this as a podcast episode on the Lead to Soar podcast a little bit later down the track. So if you are joining us live, feel free to post your comments and your questions, and we will endeavour to get to them. But we want to make this snappy, like kind of make it around 25 or 30 minutes. So let's get cracking. Over to you, Mel.
All right. Yeah, we'll do our best. Okay, so we're here today to talk about accidental managers. So I want to start high level here. First off, what do we mean by accidental manager?
Well, it's interesting. When I first stumbled across the research that we're going to talk about, I thought, oh, that was me. So the accidental manager is someone who has, typically been promoted into typically their first or a management role quietly and without any training. And that usually occurs because you're pretty good at the job that you were doing. And of course, when you read things, or when I read things, I often go, oh, yeah, you think about your own experiences. And as I read the research, the article, and then the research, I thought, oh, yeah, I remember being an accidental manager. But then I got curious and thought, who else is an accidental manager out there? And then, of course, you and I started asking questions of our network, particularly in the Lead to Soar network and the women that we work with. And we got a lot of feedback about the implications of accidental managers for the managers themselves, but of course, for team members who are being managed by an accidental manager. So then we went, right, we need to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other high level thing I want you to parse out for us here at the beginning is we really distinguish between manager and leader. So say just a little bit about what do we actually mean by manager versus what do we mean by a leader?
Well, there's I always go back to the wisdom that Susan Colantuno has shared with us, which was the first one is be wary of people who say leader and manager are the same. They are not. Leaders inspire people or themselves, themselves, team members and organisations to greatness. So leaders are the ones who are using the greatness in them to achieve and sustain extraordinary outcomes by engaging the greatness in others. Managers are getting stuff done. So managers are administering, they are organising, they are doing jobs and tasks and things like that at the administration side, the management side, and both of which are important. So we need to distinguish between task and inspiration if I wanted to just use two words.
Yeah. Okay. I want to get eventually to some core competencies, but before we go there, let's talk a little bit about what some of the statistics show us. So I found some pretty interesting ones I'll share, and then I'd love to hear what you picked up from asking the network questions. So this is from something called HR Dive, and they said among managers who oversee one to two employees, 59% report having no training at all. The same measure stands at 41% among those who oversee 3 to 5 workers. To keep pace, 42% of new managers admit they developed their style by observing and mimicking a previous manager rather than through any type of formalized training. There's more here, but that last one concerns me enough that I think we can pause and talk about this.
And it's really timely. I worked with a group of women in one of my corporate clients programs. So I run a 4-month leadership program for women, and part of that program is looking at a strategic project for the organisation. And one of these projects, and this is literally just finished at the end of May, one of the projects was around how do we help managers be ready for anything? And as the women, the team of women were working through, well, what is the current state? They were doing informational interviews with aforesaid managers. And the data that came out, which they then said, Michelle, we need to talk to you and get your thoughts about this. The data that came out mirrored what you've just said, Mel, which is, I haven't really had any training. I am overwhelmed with task. I have so much going on as a manager, and I don't know that I can take on any more. And also, I don't know that the people stuff, I just haven't got time for the people stuff, which of course rings huge alarm bells, big red flags for me. Anyway, so I had this conversation with this particular team, and I must admit, yes, I did get on my little soapbox. And they said, what's going on here? And I said, what's happened is that we get promoted into a role and we learn from the person who was in it before us, who had learned from the person before, the person before, the person before. And if you really wanted to do a bit of a driver tree, you go, I reckon we're learning from people, really management techniques from, if I want to be kind, the 1990s, the 1980s. If I want to be really unkind, holy moly, are we learning from the principles around the industrialized world? When people came from farms into factories to be supervised on production lines. And, there will be some of our listeners who are going, yeah, it feels a little bit like that for me at work some days. I feel like I've got to be supervised and watched. And our managers are feeling like they have to supervise and watch and oversee rather than inspire greatness and develop people and what have you. So, that really resonates with me and with the conversations that I've had with my clients and people that I work with now.
Yeah, for that reason, I think that the term management can get a bad rap because we do associate it with a lot of the sort of relics from the industrial age and that kind of industrial management that you're talking about. So in the modern day, that looks like employee surveillance or a culture of requiring obedience. And we still
Command and
see
control.
command and control. Yes. So we see it today.
Yeah.
I came across another headline that is pretty funny. So this is a Forbes headline that says a startling 98% of managers believe managers need more training. So there's definitely some calls to action here for leaders to do something about this. Your managers not only need the training, but they want the training.
Yes.
Something like 75% of millennials believe that professional development opportunities are one of the most important aspects of company culture. So, the millennials right now are the biggest part of the workforce. And I suspect they're probably the biggest pool in the management world as well. So this is important. Michelle, what do leaders need to think about when they are selecting someone to maybe facilitate management training for them or designing a management training program?
So let's talk about selection first. And you and I have talked about let's look at competence rather than confidence. And I always default back to Tomas Chamorro Premuzic's research around why do so many incompetent men become leaders and what do we do about it. For the men listening, this is not a slash at men, this is a slash at the system, which is as a system, as people in a system, we are looking for confident, charismatic people, and we assume that a confident, charismatic person is going to nail it, is going to have what it takes. And of course, we know that that's not always the case. We see many, many confident, charismatic people who are the subject of biopics around how they've absolutely screwed up their company or their country. So, we don't see a lot of biopics around very efficient, quiet, competent leaders. So I want organisations and leaders to start looking at what are the competencies and the characteristics required to lead. And we know that the competencies required are BQ, EQ, SQ, business intelligence, so business, strategic, and financial acumen. We know that EQ is super important. How a person who is really competent at leading themselves, others, and the organisation towards those outcomes that are important. And SQ, someone who is ethical, trustworthy, well networked, and also has a great personal brand. So I want leaders to look for those competencies and evidence of those competencies when they're recruiting for leaders. And then the second part is really then saying, and then what do I do when I put someone into a role? We provide them with support. Now, 70-20-10 is a kind of a ratio around learning. 70% of what we learn is on the job, and we learn from those around us doing the job, learning by doing. So I acknowledge that we are actually going to learn by doing the job. 20% of our development is from mentoring, coaching, but formal interactions with folks who are experts, particularly in the areas that you require development in. So provide strategic mentors and strategic mentoring and group type environments where that leader can learn. And I've got some ideas around that. And then 10% is around formal education. And that formal education, for me, I think an onboarding program for new leaders. One of my clients actually has leadership fundamentals. So when a leader is appointed, they are required to do leadership fundamentals. So it's the 101s. How do you process leave applications? How do you make sure, run effective meetings? How do you run effective one-on-ones? Things like that. So those absolute fundamentals that are going to be set you up for success. So in terms of new leaders, those leadership fundamentals, extraordinarily important to fall into the 10%. But then on an ongoing basis, we know that one and done is not acceptable for leadership development, continuing professional development. So that's the advice I have for leaders.
Yeah, thank you for that. So let's pull on the core competencies sort of thread here a little bit, because I went looking around to see, okay, what are people writing about core competencies of managers? And I agreed with about half of it, I would say. So maybe let's start with things that I don't think these fall into manager competencies, but you tell me if you disagree. So you mentioned outward confidence, not a competency. Some other things that I don't think are absolutely critical for a people manager: strategic thinking, sales, interviewing skills, technical expertise. Uh, and this one I saw several times and I thought was weird: an entrepreneurial spirit. I don't think any of these things are core to being an effective manager for the organization.
No, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I certainly see some elements of leadership there, particularly I'll pull out a thread on that entrepreneurial one in a moment. But no,
Yeah.
that's not management. You know, the way I try to describe it is saying, have you ever worked for someone who's just amazing, you're inspired by them, what have you, but man, you can never get your emails answered, you never get your leave application, your paid time off application processed on time, they're hard to get hold of, and they're running around like a headless chicken all the time. They're fabulous, but a little bit disorganized, and you can't get the basics done. Two things can be true at the same time. I can have this person who I think is amazing and inspirational, but geez, they're hard to work with because you just can't get the basics done. So I think that's, the basics are that is the oil that greases the wheels of leadership and management altogether. So I feel like that's what we're talking about here, Mel.
Yeah, I always think about project management when this comes up, because in the engineering world, project management, a good chunk of it is people management, because you have to
Yeah.
get everyone on the same page and get them moving in the right
Herding
direction.
the
And if
cats.
Yep, and if someone falls behind, helping them get to where they need to be. And the best project manager I ever worked with in that space was not a technical person. Her degree was in literature, and she had been trained up in
Right.
the software tech space and made the transition into the more like environmental and engineering sciences space that I was working in. And so I think of her, and that's a good way to segue us into core competencies of a manager. So here are the ones that I think really do fit under manager, right? People manager.
Mm.
Delegation, I've got 10, okay? Delegation, communication, especially difficult conversations, including things around performance management,
Mhm.
good attitude,
Mm.
fostering teamwork slash collaboration, patience, EQ, conflict resolution, flexibility or adaptability, and a realistic goal setter. And then to some extent, the coaching sort of mentoring skills. So those are my 10 that I came up with.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think where I struggle a little bit is around, like, I guess it's a little bit like a Venn diagram. You've got management here, leadership here, and there's a bit in the centre where the zone of genius is. So I suppose that's where I'm wobbling between the two. But if I look at if I look at the people management side of it, and we often say people leaders, and I go, okay, people leaders who say to me, I haven't got time to do my one-on-ones. I go, um, the first part of your title is people leader, not email manager or meeting goer to. So, and I think about a person, a manager in one of my client organisations some time ago, who said on a very big forum of about 300 or 400 people that I was hosting a workshop, someone asked the question about, well, how do I make time for this stuff that you're asking us to do, Michelle? And this person beautifully chimed in and said, look, I look at the old analogy around the professor who was at the front of the college group of college students and said, this is how you do time management. It's big rocks, little rocks, sand, water. And he had a glass of water, and he said, if you put water in and then try and put rocks in, then pebbles, then sand, the water's going to overflow. But if you put your big rocks in first, then your little rocks, then your sand, then fill it up with water, you can still fill up the thing. Moral of the story is, what are your big rocks? The big rocks are around engaging the greatness in the team members that you're leading. So how are we making sure, to your example there, Mel, how am I using my skills, my competencies to make sure that I've got the right people in the right place at the right time doing the right thing for the organisation and the outcomes that we need to generate. So that's a real leadership skill, but it's also a management skill. So, there is a delineation, but, and I look at, if we think about perhaps the accidental manager in that scenario that I've just talked about, perhaps that person who didn't have the good EQ skills might be in that command and control. Mel, just get the work done. I need you there to do this at this time, without saying, I wonder if Mel is really super keen and is skilled to do this work. Is she the right person to have in the right place at the right time? Or perhaps it's Michelle that should be doing this work. So there's a real combo here. But I guess when it comes to two things, time management and delegation, again, I see those as skills that are not overtly taught. There's kind of some kind of assumption that we're going to grab it by osmosis. So, yeah.
Totally. So just reiterating here that when we're speaking about management, we're not simply talking about getting people to do the thing you want them to do. Good
Yeah.
management is important because it's the biggest factor that contributes to employee engagement, right? To your employees
Mm.
feeling safe and engaged in their work, right? Their direct manager owns such a huge chunk of that pie. So, Michelle, what else do you want leaders to hear, maybe to reduce this percentage of accidental managers?
Well, for the most senior leaders with the biggest budgets and the most decision-making capacity in organizations, I want you to ask yourself, how much money are we spending on employee engagement initiatives, mental health and well-being initiatives, versus how much are we spending on the people who have the most impact on those very team members that we're trying to engage? And how about we might take just a slice of that budget and pop it over into the learning and development budget and say, how can we really help our people leaders be great? Because I see two forces banging up against each other all the time. And yes, look, I've got more war stories than we've both had hot dinners from people, predominantly women, who've said to me, Michelle, I've had an accidental manager and here's the impact it has on me. I love my organisation and I love what it does, but my manager's a dick. And
Oh, yeah, we
I,
had
I
that.
just I just want them to be better, and
Yeah.
they just don't know what they're doing. And in a power imbalance situation. So I'm a team member. My boss is whether they're an accidental manager or not, but they just haven't had the access to training, coaching, mentoring to be the best that they can possibly be. So I want leaders to think, how do we really get smart? How do we get really strategic about the investment we're making, where we're investing money in our organisation? And the other thing to pull that even further, Mel, is to say, don't just invest in executive leaders.
Mm,
I want the first and second rungs of management, who are so often not given access to significant development opportunities, formal and informal, soon enough. And I certainly, in my own history, I was an accidental manager. Oh, she's a very good. I was in a credit society. She's a really good teller. She's good at she's good at with the customers. Let's make her a supervisor.
yep.
Then let's make her a branch manager. I didn't have any training. I learned from the person before, and I kind of bumbled my way through. It wasn't until much later on, but fortunately, I worked for an organisation who I had some extraordinary frontline manager training from, which I totally took for granted at the time, Mel. But now I look back and I go, wow, that gave me the fundamentals, particularly around time management, particularly around task management, what's important versus what's not important. As I said, totally took it for granted at the time. But let's have a look at frontline leaders and where does the investment in their development match our goals around having an engaged, high performing workforce. Because we
Mm,
know that somewhere between 45 and 70% of people's decisions about their career relate to their direct manager. So people
right.
walk away from a manager, not
Ye
necessarily from an organisation.
That is absolutely right. Yeah, we have seen those examples, in our own lives and in the Lead to Soar network. So,
Mm.
Michelle, I want to do a quick recap here. Some of the highlights. First of all, there are far too many accidental managers. There are many managers, one managers who are just starting out, as well as those who have been in that position for a long time, who simply have little to no managerial training. There are specific people manager skills. And while some of these skills are leadership skills, we're really distinguishing leadership from management. And some of the people management core competencies that we see are things like delegation, communication, good attitude, fostering teamwork and collaboration, EQ, conflict resolution, coaching and mentoring, and flexibility. And things that are not managerial competencies are things like sales, strategic thinking, technical expertise, and an entrepreneurial spirit. So, the calls to action that we have for our leaders are to get serious about putting some budget towards your managers, especially the lower level managers, to get them some of the training that they need so they can be really effective at their jobs and really effective at engaging your people. Because once again, the managers hold the biggest piece of the engagement pie. Anything else, Michelle?
I think you've summed that up absolutely beautifully, Mel. And I'll add that management training is not one and done.
Yes.
Continuing professional development. Now, I will also add to that that there is a responsibility for the two parties in the organisation. Me, as a manager and a leader, I need to keep investing in and be committed to my continuing professional development. As an organisational leader, I also need to make sure that all managers have access to ongoing training. So it's a two-way street.
100%. Yes. And just because someone's great at engineering or being a teller doesn't mean they'll be great at managing the people doing that work.
It does not. And, and I've been very honest about, when I was first a manager at the age of 22, God, I thought I was amazing. And I look back and go, oh, I was pretty shit. I was pretty shit. So, but I live and learn, and look, and I'm honest enough to say, holy crap, I've learned from it. So my retrospective apologies to those people that I was managing back then.
Yeah. Oh, delightful. Okay. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Michelle, on accidental managers. And we've got more lives scheduled. So we hope to see you
We
all
do.
on a future one.
Awesome. Thanks, Mel. Well facilitated as always in your zone of genius.
Thanks, Michelle.
Cool. Bye.
Bye.